He's in the middle holding the ball.
That high school basketball player would become a legend, not for his layups, but for his writing. His name was Jim Carroll, and he started writing what would become the Basketball Diaries when he was just 12 years old. Carroll grew up in Upper Manhattan. He was a star high school athlete, but he was also drawn to writing, particularly poetry. Jim Carroll scholar Cassie Carter explains.
He got started at the Poetry Project, which is a nonprofit poetry type foundation in New York. He started attending the workshops there. He would help out at the readings with the big poets would come to town. And the poets around him started noticing him. And so he was able to work with some of the greatest poets on the scene and in the United States at the time that were supportive of him and he was able to sit down and start writing poetry and having their feedback. It was just a really supportive environment for this kid to blossom into a poet. He also started reading excerpts from the Basketball Diaries in these workshops. Jim Carroll is pretty well known as someone who had a heroin addiction of epic proportions. He writes about that in the Basketball Diaries.
When they were published in 1978, the Basketball Diaries became a literary sensation. One reviewer called it a great work of storytelling. The New York Times called it a hair-raising portrait of adolescent street life. The book was adapted into a 1995 movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio.
So, I write these words to escape these hopeless streets.
One of the things that is interesting about him that I think for young people to look at is just this idea of the athlete. You know, we've got this culture of you've got to be all tough and masculine and strong and all of that, and that it doesn't go with, say, poetry. Well, here's an example of somebody who was among the best athletes of his age, and he was this poet.
In addition to the Basketball Diaries, Carroll wrote several books of poetry, further diaries, and a novel. He also fronted the Jim Carroll Band. The group was part of New York's new wave and punk scene in the late 1970s. One of their best-known songs, 1980's People Who Died. Jim Carroll died of a heart attack on September 11th of 2009. The writer, who was best known for what he did as a teenager, was 60 years old. This is InsideEdition.com.